Thanks for this opportunity to come and talk to this Keep Australia Beautiful and Icon Water thought leadership session. I think it's easy to forget about how precious water is. The dams fill up and water quickly goes off the front page. But in a country like Australia, we know that it's only a matter of time before we'll be called on again to really think long and hard about the future of our water resources. In terms of the presentation today, this is the rough structure, and I guess I wanted us all to get in the helicopter or get in the spaceship almost and just take a global perspective and then move down to the Australian, the Murray-Darling and then the Canberra context. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those challenges I just mentioned in terms of drought, in terms of bushfires, some of the other challenges that lie ahead, and what is currently going on across the ACT and region in terms of governments coming together, working with the community and doing a whole range of things to try and make sure that we're better placed for the next drought, for the next time when we get worried about running out of water. So I guess this is in the spaceship looking at the global picture of water, and the important point to make is that globally, water can't be created or destroyed. It just moves around, it's in different places at different times. And if you're down in the Shoalhaven at the moment, you'd be very worried about too much water. I heard they were doing flood rescues this morning. In Australia in general, we generally worry about water scarcity, not having enough water in the right places. And the other challenge really is the quality of our water. Having water, but it's not adequate quality for the purposes that we want to put it to. So in summary, the challenges globally are too much, too little, or too dirty. Just to illustrate the Australian perspective, here's some of the major river basin systems across the world, and a ratio between the maximum recorded annual flow and the minimum recorded annual flow. So I guess it's a measure of variability. How variable are those river systems? And you can see that the Australian systems are right down there at the bottom with variability of 15 up to 50 times for different river systems. So, the dry years are very dry, the wet years are quite wet as well. Despite the fact that we are the driest inhabited continent, and I should say Canberra's the largest inland city and the driest inhabited continent in the world, you can see that in terms of our water use, on a per capita basis at least, we do rank pretty high in terms of our water use. You can see that this is a range of countries. Australia's the third from the right there, so the third highest water user of all those countries listed there, behind the United States and behind Canada. And this chart also gives you the breakdown of how much we use in our houses in a sort of a domestic sense, how much goes to agriculture and how much goes to industry. And agriculture makes up about 2/3 of our water use nationally, followed by about 15% to both domestic and industrial use. So very dry continent, lots of water scarcity, but the water that we do have, we use pretty hard per capita. To give you an idea of some of the challenges across Australia, this is the distribution of Australia's surface runoff for the major river basins. And you can see the blue areas up in the north. There's combined across those three coastal systems in the north, about 60 or 65% of our surface water is in those areas. If you come down to the Murray-Darling Basin, the large green area, there's about 6% of the surface water available in the Murray-Darling Basin. That's despite the Murray-Darling Basin covering about 15% of the land mass. And the important point there is the Murray-Darling Basin really is the food bowl for agriculture in Australia. So it produces over 50% of our agricultural produce from 6% of the water. The other important point, most of the inland and the western parts of the country have very close to no water, so very large inland desert, lots of water scarcity over in Western Australia. And one of the sort of barbecue discussions invariably, certainly during the drought, was we've got all this water up in the north of Australia, why don't we just build the big pipelines and bring it down to the south? And the Western Australian government did a study of doing just that. And what they found was building a pipeline or a canal to bring water from the north of Western Australia down to Perth would cost in the order of about $12 a kilolitre to move that water. It was actually cheaper to get large old decommissioned oil tankers and tow bladders with the water down the coast. That was about $5 or $6 a kilolitre. But the idea of desalination plants really shone through. That was about $1 to $2 a kilolitre. So you can see that, yes, the oceans can be used to transport water, but with desalination technology, there are reasonably cost-effective ways, and Perth's led the way with desalination, followed by most of the other capital cities through the millennium drought. Tasmania also sort of punches above its weight, about 13% of the surface water, and there's significant irrigation development underway in Tasmania. The issue of the water in the north, I guess the idea of turning the north into a new food bowl is often brought up, and certainly there are a range of opportunities up in the north. Some of the challenges there are that the water's very heavy, often close to the coast. There are limited sites for good dams, and in a lot of cases the soils are reasonably poor. So there's some of the challenges, but notwithstanding, there probably are at least some opportunities for further irrigation development up in northern Australia. The other challenge, I've mentioned Perth already over there in the west, and this is a graph of inflows to Perth's surface water storages over about the last 100 years. And you can see that the climate changes that we see across the continent, and in Perth in particular, mean that Perth has really had a couple of step change reductions in terms of its water availability. From about the mid-1970s, there was almost a halving, and then through the 2000 period, a further reduction again. And that's prompted Perth to put in 2 desalination plants now, also large-scale recycling of their sewage, treated sewage, which is being treated to drinking water quality and putting back into the groundwater system to allow that to then be taken out at a later date. I guess one of the other challenges we've got, the first picture I put up of the water cycle globally was quite a complex picture of how water moves around. I guess as humans we have chosen, in Australia at least, to make it more complicated by putting jurisdictional lines on the map. And you can see the states and territories and the Murray-Darling there, certainly crossing over 4 of the states, the ACT and the Commonwealth also involved. And when you go to Australia's Constitution, Clause 100 of the Constitution says that the federal government won't restrict the ability of the states and territories to develop their water resources for navigation, for riverboat travel, which was a big issue back when the Constitution was drafted, but also for irrigation. So that's really set the context for our water management systems. We are very well regarded internationally in terms of our water management, probably because of some of these challenges of cross-border issues in the Murray-Darling. Also the Great Artesian Basin, which isn't shown there, is a very large part of the country and crosses Queensland, South Australia, Northern Territory and New South Wales. So the federal government plays an important role, as do the states and territories. In terms of coming down again in the helicopter, this is the Murray-Darling Basin, obviously. Canberra sits at the top end of the Murrumbidgee catchment, which you can see in the middle there. And the history of water use in the Murray-Darling Basin, particularly since the World Wars, has been one of pro-development, developing the water resources for irrigation, building large storages to capture the water, allow it to be used between the wet years into the dry years. And that's resulted in significant stress in terms of the rivers and groundwater systems. So this next chart just really puts that into perspective. This was work that CSIRO did, called the Sustainable Yields work for the Murray-Darling Basin back in the drought. And it gives you a ratio again of the amount of surface water use compared to the water availability in each of those catchments across the Murray-Darling Basin. You can see that the Murrumbidgee is one of the most stressed systems. It's across there to the right, about 3 or 4 from the right. And along with the Goulburn Broken, the Wimmera and the Condamine Ballon is areas where there is significant diversions, mainly for irrigation use, and as a result, degradation of the river systems. And as you go down the river system into South Australia, you can really see that it's very stark in terms of the degradation that's apparent along the river. This is a slide that Rob Vertesi, the Chief Executive of the Bureau of Meteorology, put together, summarising the big 8 water scarcity factors, and this would apply globally, but certainly in terms of Australia. And I just, in terms of my mind, went through and said which of those are the big ones for Canberra and the region. And certainly we've had growing urban demand, and that's projected to continue. We've had bushfires. I'll talk a bit more about those 2003 bushfires. We've had a push over the last 20 or so years to improve the environmental flows across the Murray-Darling Basin, and ACT's done some good work in that regard. And this challenge of a variable and changing climate and what that might mean for us. I guess the big overlay on all of this is just the cards that Australia was dealt in terms of variability, which I mentioned earlier. And Dorothea McKellar in her poem My Country talks about droughts and flooding rains, and the millennium drought in the first 10 years of this millennium really brings that out. It wasn't right across Australia that the drought existed. You can see the red areas on the map, most of southeast Australia, the Murray-Darling Basin, the main capital cities there, as well as Western Australia, particularly Perth. And when the drought ends, it usually ends in a big way for Australia, and that was the case in 2010, 2011, with flood conditions, certainly the big Brisbane floods, significant flooding in Victoria and other parts of the country as shown then. Perth, unfortunately for them, didn't come out of drought at that point. I think they're getting a bit better rain this year, and the forecasts are looking a bit better, but they've certainly continued to invest in non-climate dependent water sources, as I mentioned, desalination and recycling. Now, this is the 2003 bushfires for the ACT, and many of you would have been in Canberra when the bushfires occurred, and I guess this just shows why catchment management becomes so critical. In 2003, you can see that the bushfires started there on about the 18th of January 2003, and after burning for about a week across the edges of the ACT, the fires entered the suburbs of Canberra on the 18th of January, and over the next 10 hours, 4 people, very unfortunately, died, and more than 500 homes were destroyed or severely damaged, requiring a significant relief and reconstruction effort. In addition to that sort of human side of the fires, the bushfires severely harmed the vegetation of the Cotter River catchment and caused water quality problems in the 3 dams in the catchment, the Corrin, Bendora and Cotter Dams that Bronwyn mentioned before. And for quite some time after the fires, the turbidity in the water due to silt and ash from the surrounding burnt-out forests meant Canberra had to rely on Googong Dam on the Queanbeyan River, which wasn't affected by the fires. So given the drought and the existing water shortages, this effectively reduced Canberra's water reserves to around 15% for some time. And there was an immediate requirement for upgrades to the Stromlo water treatment plant to allow for the Cotter water to be treated into the future. And there's been a lot of good work. Most recently, the ACT Auditor General looked at what had happened in the Cotter, and earlier this year reported on that. And there's been significant rehabilitation effort, Icon Water, ACT Government and the community. And the water quality has improved over the subsequent 10 years. But I guess the risk remains of this bushfire and catastrophic failure of the catchment. And the Auditor-General really highlighted some of the areas where coordination between government directorates, Icon Water and across into New South Wales could be further improved. The ACT government responded with an announced funding package of $7.8 million to look at improved fire management, further work on the water quality. But importantly, the ACT government, in partnership with the Commonwealth, with Icon Water, with New South Wales government and the local governments, has come together to form an ACT and region catchment coordination group. And I'll talk more about that, and we really feel that that's one of the key mechanisms to deal with some of these cross-border issues, to deal with risks like bushfires into the future, and I'll talk a bit more about a couple of those risks. So in terms of the policy responses, in 2004 the ACT government brought out Think Water, Act Water, which had a focus on capital works, Icon Water, upgrading Cotter Dam and the Murrumbidgee to Googong pipeline. Also water reduction targets, so a 25% per capita water reduction target on our 2003 levels of water reduction. You can see there's a pretty good story there about water reductions post-2003. In part, that was driven by pretty severe water restrictions, and the hope is that into the future we won't need those water restrictions, and we can, through efficiency and the capital upgrades and other mechanisms like water trading, which I'll mention in a moment, we won't have to introduce water restrictions into the future. The Think Water Act Water also dealt with some of the other water quality issues, so reducing the level of sediments and nutrients entering the waterways, and reducing the intensity and volume of urban stormwater flows, and I'll talk further about those as well. So Bronwyn's already covered the Enlarged Cotter Dam, very significant structure there, and I think it's about 20 or 40 times as big as it was previously in terms of its capacity to hold water. Significant cost, over $400 million, but a very significant piece of infrastructure for the ACT into the future. The Murrumbidgee to Googong pipeline, which is shown there, a bit cheaper but still significant cost, and allowing for different configurations, so taking water from the Murrumbidgee across to Googong, obviously, and when there's excess water in the Murrumbidgee, making use of it and using the significant infrastructure at Googong. So that really gives you an idea of the layout of Canberra's water supply. I guess into the future, we're keen to talk about some of the things like water trading, which has been a real success story, and I've got a slide, I'll come back to that in a second. So in terms of the challenges, we've got an active Waterwatch community here in the ACT and region. They put out their Catchment Health Indicator report card. That's the 2013-2014 one, that's on the website, and I'd encourage you, if you wanted to get in and have a look at how the catchment health varies across the ACT and region, to download that. But the Waterwatch, I think, is a fantastic example of citizen science. So government and community working in partnership. The Waterwatch program in the ACT region has got over 12,000 records on its database. It collects data from 300 sites, with some of those dating back nearly 20 years. And it's a resource to complement other government collected data. And as I said, provides a score of catchment health using the collective data of the Waterwatch program. This just gives you an idea of the sort of presentation. Can't say it too well, but basically different river reaches are scored, and it shows the sampling sites. And the general message from that catchment health report card is that turbidity, the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus are the biggest issues, and there is a general deterioration as you progress down the catchment. There's some gaps in the data, and the Waterwatch program is currently expanding and looking to fill those gaps. In terms of the regional challenges, I think one of the biggest would have to be population growth. The graph there shows you how the population has grown over the last 30 or so years, and how it's projected to change into the future. Obviously the pace of change will vary depending on government and the private sector investments and the general strength of the economy. But certainly there's plenty of land around the ACT and region. I think we've got about 15 years of land supply in the ACT itself, so the government's moving to a higher density approach in the ACT, but there's significant development going on in some of the surrounding New South Wales local government areas. You can see the figures there, and I think that's a positive, but brings with it some challenges. The climate change overlay, some of the figures shown there, and I think as much as the increasing temperature signature, also potential changes in our rainfall, which could change the distribution away from spring and into summer and autumn, might mean that we get less benefit from the rain when it does fall in terms of filling up the dams on the Cotter and Googong. So I guess just thinking about what climate change means for us is also important going into the future. Googong Dam, I guess this issue of cross-border management really comes into sharp focus when you think about Googong Dam. It was constructed in 1975, opened in 1979, and built with an objective of providing water to Canberra and Queanbeyan, but it does have a very complex legislative and policy framework. It was built and is owned by the Commonwealth Government. It's situated in New South Wales. In 2008, the Commonwealth leased Googong Dam to the ACT Government for a period of 150 years under the Googong Dam Act, and that Act outlines the principal objectives for managing Googong as the protection of the water from pollution and for water supply. And some of the challenges with Googong Dam, there's urban development going on around there, the Googong homestead, peri-urban development, and Googong is seen as a recreational opportunity. It's promoted as such. So you've got this tension of the recreational objectives of the New South Wales Government potentially conflicting with the objectives of Icon Water and the ACT Government and the Googong Dam Act, the Commonwealth Act, in terms of protection of water supply. So that's a live discussion. Where is the right balance in terms of recreational opportunities and protecting the water supply? Lake Burley Griffin, and I'd acknowledge Malcolm Snow, the CEO of the National Capital Authority, here today. I think Lake Burley Griffin really is the heart of Canberra and the jewel of the national capital, and recently celebrated its 50th birthday. However, it has had challenges with poor water quality, and the solutions to these problems will require a regional approach. So the lake's managed by the National Capital Authority on behalf of the Commonwealth, but it does receive inflows from the ACT and the New South Wales upstream. In 2012, the ACT Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment released a task force report into Lake Burley Griffin and identified the sources of pollution, which included urban runoff, wildlife, regrowth of bacteria already in the lake, the upstream sewage treatment plants, possible sewer leaks, and the rural catchments, particularly during periods of high rainfall. That piece of work also estimated the risks in terms of the economic impact of continued lake closures as a result of blue-green algae, and estimated that there was a potential economic cost to Canberra in the order of $25 million per year. So significant economic impacts associated with poor water quality. And I guess some of those pictures show pretty graphically blue-green algae, lake closures, and the reduced amenity and recreational opportunities that can come from that. I mentioned briefly water trading. Water trading is sort of one of these abstract concepts if you're not involved in it, but for about the last 20 years, Australia's developed a significant water trading system across the states and territories, particularly in the Murray-Darling Basin, but right across the country. And this is the main stem of the Murray River and the Darling, and this shows the interstate water trading zones. Now, you can't see Canberra on there because it's further up the Murrumbidgee than is shown, and water trading's been a real success story in terms of allowing water to move between different uses, for farmers to sell water when they want to buy it back at other times, to allow cities to buy water and strengthen their water security through that mechanism. But the ACT hasn't yet got involved in the water trading market, and I think in the future this is going to be critical. In the past, our water supplies have largely been limited by rainfall through droughts, by our infrastructure, our ability to capture the water. But the Murray-Darling Basin Plan brings in sustainable diversion limits right across the Murray-Darling Basin. So that's how much water we can use to protect the environment into the future. And I think in the future, that sustainable diversion limit for the ACT, which is about 40 gigalitres per year, we already use a bit more than that, but we get credited for our return flows from the sewage treatment plant, so we are under our sustainable diversion limit. But as our population grows, we potentially could come up against this sustainable diversion limit, and water trading is a way for us to buy water from downstream to allow for future population growth. So there's some real opportunities with water trading. We need to get the Murray-Darling Basin Murray-Darling Basin Authority to agree. We need to get the New South Wales government to agree. So again, cross-border issues are really critical to that. So what's been happening? What's the response? I mentioned Think Water Act Order, which was back in 2004. That was updated last year with the a new ACT water strategy, Striking the Balance, which was launched in August last year. Its vision is listed there: a community working together, managing water wisely to support a vibrant, sustainable and thriving region. And 3 outcomes: healthy catchments and water bodies, a sustainable water supply used efficiently, and a community that values and enjoys clean, healthy catchments. And I think it's a pretty powerful document. It envisages a 30-year timeframe. There's a 5-year implementation strategy that goes with this. That's all available on the website. And there's many actions. There's 18 different actions. A number of those have sub-actions, so there's over 50 things to do. And I guess rather than just a shopping list of things to do, the document really gives a strategic view about how to manage our water sustainably into the future. So look, I could talk for an hour or two about that, but I won't, other than to say it's there, and I'd be very happy if people wanted to talk offline or afterwards to do that. What else are we doing? The Basin Priority Project, some of you know that well, some of you might have heard about it. The Canberra Clean Water, as we're calling it, is a significant investment by the Commonwealth Government and the ACT Government to address water quality issues in Lake Burley, Griffin, but more broadly across the ACT and region. And it's focusing on 6 catchments. They're listed there: Upper Molonglo, Fishwick, Lake Tuggeranong, Yarralumla Creek, Lower Molonglo and Riverview, West Belconnen. So 2 catchments that drain into Lake Burley, Griffin. The Lake Tuggeranong catchment, and Lake Tuggeranong's certainly got significant water quality issues. And it's up to $93.5 million of investment to investigate, better understand the causes of the water quality problems, but then to build a range of infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure, which could be new constructed wetlands, possibly bubblers in the lakes to better aerate the lakes, soft infrastructure like riparian revegetation along the waterways and so forth, really to try and improve our water quality for this region, but downstream into the Murrumbidgee River and further down in the Murray-Darling Basin. So that project's underway. We're pretty advanced through phase 1. We're due to submit a business case to the Commonwealth in December of this year, and we're hopeful that that will unlock the bulk of the funding for those infrastructure works through to 2019. Water sensitive urban design. I'm really looking forward to Tony's presentation later on, because I've heard a lot of good things about water sensitive cities, CRC, and the work they're doing. And the ACT's been doing some significant work in water sensitive urban design. We brought in a code back in 2009. We reviewed the approach to water sensitive urban design last year and released a review report. And we've seen a significant number of new water sensitive urban design assets, a holistic approach to water-sensitive urban design, but some challenges, and we're thinking about how to respond to those challenges. A couple of the actions are to restructure the code, make it more flexible for developers so that we can make sure that investment from developers or government goes to achieving the best outcomes, and alternative management and funding models. So really to make sure that we've got sustainable water-sensitive urban design infrastructure and a way to pay for that into the future. The social expectations of waterways. If you're an ACT resident, hopefully you saw something like you see there on the right-hand side in your letterbox, and had the opportunity to get online and participate in this Social Expectations of Waterways survey, which only closed a couple of weeks ago. It's a survey of attitudes and behaviours across the ACT and region, undertaken by the University of Canberra on behalf of the ACT and Region Catchment Management Committee that I mentioned before, with some funding from ACT Government and the Basin Priority Project. The survey had a target of 3,000 responses. It ended up with 4,200 complete responses, a further 500 majority complete, so nearly 5,000 usable responses in the end. And a real fantastic treasure trove of information about what the community think about our waterways, what they would like to see in the future, how they use them, and so forth. And the researchers have only just been looking at that for about a week or two, so we don't have the full data, but a couple of the snippets that have come out across the community, 50 to 70% of the sample believe that we have water quality problems in our lakes. When you go to the Tuggeranong community, it's 80%, so that reflects some of the water quality challenges in Tuggeranong. And there's very strong support for naturalising creeks, for improving things like gross pollutant traps, for building new wetlands, new rain gardens. And the survey will inform both the Basin Priority Project in terms of which infrastructure gets built where across those 6 catchments. But also, I guess there's a real recognition that in terms of better water quality, you need a top to bottom approach for the catchment, a catchment treatment train, if you like. Infrastructure is part of that, but really education and treating the problems at source. So getting the community to understand what the issues are, and then motivating them to play their part, whether it's raking up the leaves that fall out in the front yard or in the gutters, or look at reducing fertilisers, picking up litter and so forth. So it will inform future education programs, and we're talking again with that ACT and Region Catchment Management Committee to see if we can harmonise the messages across all the organisations involved there, so that we can get a reinforcing approach to the education programs. So I've just got one or two snippets. The chart on the left shows you the attitudes about water quality problems in the local lakes, and they're the different catchments. Probably you can't read that, but there is a variation there, and Lake Tuggeranong, as I said, is the highest in terms of believing there's problems in the local lakes. Interestingly, that's significantly higher than when you ask the same question about rivers across the area. So only about 30 to 40% of people think there's problems in the rivers, compared to 50 to 80% in the lakes. On this side is the attitude about community support for establishing new urban wetlands. So the red bars there are people who oppose, and we were quite pleased to see it's sort of less than 5% opposition to those sort of interventions, and really significant support, which is the yellow colour. A few people are unsure, so again, education really to tell people what urban wetlands do and the benefits they can provide is critical. And the attitudes do change when you ask the question about different things like gross pollutant traps or reducing fertilisers, which interestingly people aren't as supportive of those sort of controls on what people can do on their own properties. Again, another snippet, and this is people who think that there's water quality problems. So red is water quality problems, and that's just a range of waterways across the ACT. So Lake Tuggeranong and Lake Burley Griffin really do shine out as the ones where people believe the problems are the greatest, and certainly that's backed up by the Waterwatch data and the other data that's collected. But a whole range of waterways there, and very good data on community attitudes to those. I think I've mentioned this formation of the ACT and region catchment group. That's part of a much bigger coordination effort by the ACT, Commonwealth, New South Wales governments, which is explained in that reasonably complex slide. But I just wanted to emphasise again the ACT and region catchment group, which wasn't there up until about a year ago, is a significant initiative that the governments are coming together. There's a lot of goodwill around that table. The group's developing an integrated catchment strategy to govern and guide investments over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I guess watch this space in terms of that improved governance. Look, I'm probably out of time almost, so I guess I just wanted to summarise there. There's complex problems globally at the Australia Murray-Darling scale, and that certainly is not any different when you get to the ACT and region. There's a mix of solutions, but it does really require a long-term commitment. An old-time water planner said to me, the best time to do your water planning is when the dams are full and overflowing, so that the planning's there, ready to go when the next drought comes along. I've mentioned the ACT and region coordinating group a number of times, and I guess the ACT government and partners are really looking for practical projects for early starts. That survey is one of those. The Basin Priority Project, I think, is a fantastic opportunity to improve our water quality, and we're really working together to look at the opportunities to align and leverage investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt.